The Georgia Bulldogs are coming off back-to-back national championships, and they're looking for their third straight. Will that happen? We'll take a look at the 10 players that could make it happen, and that will have a huge impact on both offense and defense for Kirby Smart's team. We start with the defensive side of the ball. Nazir Stackhouse is a name that you probably know, but don't talk about often enough. And he plays a position that we've talked about before where the defensive tackle position doesn't get a ton of recognition simply because of the nature of that position. You're not getting a ton of stats. You're not producing a ton of tackles for loss. You are doing things to be selfless and open things up behind you. Now, the other thing with that is this is a team that has had a ton of talent, a ton of NFL talent, a ton of NFL first round talent. So to be able to stand out is difficult. And Nazir Stackhouse is no slouch. He's not a bad player. He's not an untalented player. It's just that there's so many talented players around. There's so many 4 and 5 star guys around him. It's difficult to stand out in that group. And this is a defense that is locked and loaded for another good year in 2023. On the back end of that defense is a group that should be one of the best in college football. Kamari Lassiter is already getting attention from the NFL scouts and NFL analysts. They believe that he could be a big time player at the next level. 6 feet, 180 pounds. Again, finding ways to stand out in this defense will be probably the most difficult challenge. The tools are probably there for a lot of these guys. It's just a matter of how do you put on film what everybody wants to see? How do you get certain teams to pay attention to you? And that's not a bad problem to have. It's actually a good problem, and it's a problem Kirby Smart has gotten used to over the last few years. And a guy like Kamari Lassiter, who maybe isn't going to be the most well-known name, is someone who could still make a huge impact on this team and could have a huge year. But it's again, it has more to do with the amount of talent on this team rather than him being not a good player. He's a great player, and I think that he could be a shutdown corner for this team. It's just a matter of being able to stand out and get teams to throw your way. And this is a secondary that will be good for the offense because I think a lot of people expect Georgia's passing attack to take a step forward, and it's easy to see why. And it just comes down to what does the talent at quarterback do? Carson Beck appears to be the next quarterback for the Georgia Bulldogs after Stetson Bennett's run, almost improbable run for Georgia in the last 2 years, the back-to-back national championships. He played a big role in that, and Carson Beck comes into a situation in which you inherit, I don't want to say big shoes to fill, but winning back-to-back national championships does give you a little bit of pressure. And the quarterback position is the most scrutinized position in football. So a guy like Carson Beck inherits a bigger challenge. Now, this is a guy who is a former 4 star, 6'4", 220 pounds. He has the talent. We saw a little bit of what he could do last year in limited action. You saw him in cleanup time. He did look pretty good. I think he has good zip to his throws. I believe that he can make some really, really exciting throws. And with the talent, like I said, that's returning at wide receiver, at tight end, there's a lot to be excited about. One of those wide receivers is Ladd McConkey, arguably the most underrated wide receiver in college football. He is a name that even after last year, even after some of the plays he made, he was still getting overlooked. Teams were still forgetting about him, and fans were still forgetting about him. Obviously, Georgia fans do not forget about who Ladd McConkey is. They know what he can do. But even on this team, same thing with the defense. You have so many talented players that it's tough to stand out. And a guy like Ladd McConkey can do that at times. And you saw a guy that I think people underestimated, and he made them pay 762 yards and 7 touchdowns. He is going to be a really good player for this offense. He will be a formidable force at times for the Bulldogs. But once again, you have a group that is extremely talented, that returns a ton of talent, a ton of options, a ton of weapons, and finding a way to stand out is probably the biggest challenge most of these players face. Same thing with the linebacker position. Jamon Dumas Johnson, arguably people will put him higher, and I have no arguments against that. He's a really good player, a leader for this defense. 70 tackles last year, 9 tackles for loss, 4 sacks. To be able to do what he did after, you lose a talent like Nakobe Dean, you lose so many linebackers in the past. Having Dumas Johnson come in essentially gives you that ability to reload to win a national championship. So having him in the lineup has been really good for Georgia, and now he returns after a full year of starting experience. And this defense is just going to be so difficult to beat. Even this top 10 list, putting together, there are so many names that will be left out. And it's really tough to do that. It's really tough to not talk about so many of these guys because of how many players can do so many good things and how many talented players they have on both sides of the ball. So there are a lot of arguments to be made about who should be in this list and who shouldn't. Another guy that's going to have, I think, a bigger year after what we saw in the college football playoff is Javon Bullard. And I really like what he did on the biggest stage. You saw his performance against Ohio State. You saw his performance against TCU. He was a heat-seeking missile at times. He was a big-time playmaker for this Georgia defense. And again, when you find ways to stand out, people notice. And Javon Bullard can play the game how Georgia wants, how Kirby Smart really wants his team to play, and he brings a good energy to a defense that, again, you need to find ways to stand out, bring good energy, and make it big plays. Two of the biggest things you can do. And Javon Bullard is one of those players, no matter where they put him on the field, is going to be an absolute stud for this defense. Another player that I really like, this is where you could flip him and Jamon Dumas Johnson, Smale Mondon. I really like Smale Mondon. You could add a little bit of weight to his frame. He's a little bit on the leaner side, but at 6'3, 225 pounds, he's an athletic player who can make plays both in the run game and stopping the pass as well. I like the range that he has because of that athleticism. You're able to cover more of the field. You're able to get to the ball carrier a little bit better. Even if you're on the backside of plays, you're able to chase things down. That athleticism will help him. And even if he adds a little bit of weight to his frame, adds a little bit of size, you're still going to see someone who makes a ton of plays. I really like Smale London. And again, if you want to put Jamon Dumas Johnson here instead of him, I have no arguments against that. That just means that Georgia is in great hands defensively. Offensively, they got a little bit of a boost when Cedric Van Pran decided to come back. Kind of a surprise, given that he was going to be a solid NFL draft pick, but he does return for yet another year after, he had started all 15 games last year, 34 career games played. And I think that he's looking to potentially put himself maybe even in the first round of the next year's NFL draft. 6'4", 310 pounds. He is the leader of this offensive line, an offensive line that returns quite a bit of talent. It's just a matter of finding certain replacements at certain positions, and that will be huge. The battles in the trenches for Georgia in practice are going to be insane. And one of the players that will contribute to that, in addition to Van Pran, but on the defensive side of the ball, is Michael Williams. Don't really know where they're going to line him up. Doesn't really matter, to be honest. You could put him at tackle, you can put him at end. He will find ways to win. He will find ways to be disruptive, and it's easy to see why. 6'5", 265 pounds. He will be coming back next year, which is terrifying. So this year could be an explosive year for him, and then he gets to do it yet again in 2024. And again, I think that this is a player that a lot of people are really high on, and it's easy to see why. The history that Georgia has produced on the defensive line of putting guys in the first round of the NFL draft is well documented, and Michael Williams appears to be next in line once he is eligible to go to the NFL draft. And that just gives you yet another weapon, another terror for teams to have to allocate resources to. Again, you cannot put too many guys on one person because you have so many talented players on that defensive side of the ball for Georgia that you are going to get killed by someone else. You're going to get just beat by pretty much anybody else because that's how talented they are. So you can maybe send a double team here or there, but you can't afford to do that on a play-by-play basis. So that's going to be something that will help Georgia quite a bit, and that's going to make their life very easy. One of their best players maybe that they've ever had is Brock Bowers. From the minute he stepped on campus, he was an instant impact player, and a lot of people expect him to be the first tight end taken in next year's NFL draft. You look at what he's done in his career so far with the Bulldogs, over 1,800 yards and 20 touchdowns. They even added a wrinkle last year of letting him run the football as well at times, and you saw the explosiveness in which he plays. I'm really excited to see what year 3 is for Brock Bowers. I'm really excited to see what he can do for a new quarterback and in a new system. You look at what this team could be if they're able to find ways to elevate their game and be able to adapt to this new scheme, to this new system, then Georgia will be a nightmare. There's too much talent to not be utilized. There's too much talent in the passing game to not be utilized. And you look at what they did last year. If they're able to find a couple of replacements and find some chemistry under a new system, then watch out. I do not like what is in store for the teams that face the Georgia Bulldogs. And the SEC is probably the only chance that we'll see someone take them down if someone does take them down. With the talent they have returning, the talent that they've inherited from the transfer portal, recruiting, Kirby Smart is doing a phenomenal job of building a dynasty, and he's hoping to make it a three-peat and make sure that everyone knows that you need to reach a different level if you're going to compete with the Georgia Bulldogs.